Hey everybody, in this video I just wanted to give a little bit of my background and my testimony and my journey in the faith. I've interacted in the comment section on quite a few videos, and Lord willing want to start making some videos and interacting within the YouTube community. So I'll just give you my testimony to begin with, and tell you where I'm at now and how I got there in the process. A little bit of my background. When I was a youth, I was in and out of Pentecostal church, Church of God. So I was kind of raised Pentecostal. Spent much of my early years in that church. When I became older, I wasn't in church very much, and I came to a point in my life where I questioned Christianity. Now, I always believed in God. I still believed in God, but being on the internet, you come across all kinds of teachings, and I got to a point where I questioned the existence of Jesus, whether he ever lived. And I remember being very angry at that point in my life. And at this point, believing in God, just honestly not knowing anything, not sure about anything about who God was, I said a prayer to God that, I don't know who you are, but please show me. I want to do your will. And that is the defining moment in my life, because from that point forward, I began to learn more and more about God and come more and more closer to truth. And it became a very, very essential core value in my life, because I did begin to learn from that point forward, step by step. At that point, I came across some apologetics for the existence of Jesus and the truth of Christianity, and the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of Jesus, the historical facts of the resurrection, and it became apparent to me that this event did happen. And so I started going back to church, and I went back to what I knew. I went to the Pentecostal church, Assembly of God. I grew up in the Church of God, and I found that throughout much of my church life, I did not learn very much about Scripture. There were basic things that I learned, but there was not a lot of growth and maturity in learning Scripture. And I began to start really studying or learning online. I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And I remember one of the first teachers that I ever come across online that I began to really enjoy listening to was Chuck Missler. And his eschatological background, his beliefs is premillennial dispensationalism, which that's what I grew up with. And I found it very hard to disagree with anything that Chuck Missler said. And I was, awed at his biblical knowledge. And then I began to listen to others, specifically a guy named Jim McClarty, and he was a Calvinist. I came across him by listening to some eschatology teaching, which he agreed with Chuck Missler, and that's how I come across a Calvinist belief system. At that point in time, I wasn't aware of what was taught, but I became a Calvinist because I could not, or did not have an ability to counter what was being taught to me, and it seemed clear to me. So I did become a Calvinist for quite a period of time, and through that I did meet some friends of mine I'm still friends with, and became very aware that they were what I call true Bible students. I was impressed with their ability to reason in the scriptures, and at that point in time, I thought I really knew something, and they showed me pretty quickly, just in Pal Talk chat rooms and stuff like that. We used to fellowship a little bit. That it became very apparent to me that I didn't know what I thought I knew about Scripture, and it's really at this point in my life that I was challenged to think for myself. Really challenged to think for myself, and a challenge was brought to me on the issue of eternal torment by these friends of mine. And so I began to study it, and I put a lot of effort and a lot of time into studying it. It's pretty much all I studied for some time. And the traditional view of eternal torment, I came to the conclusion that this was not a biblical doctrine at all. And still feel to this day the weight of evidence is toward conditionalism or annihilationism. And at this point in my journey, I experienced, I think, a real freedom from man's thinking, man's teaching. That I am free to think outside of the box or outside of tradition. That I'm not trapped in this box of having to believe this way because the majority does, or because it's been traditionally believed for a period of time. And that's where, at that point, I did begin to question other doctrines. And when I began to do that, there's a couple of scriptures that have become some of my favorite scriptures. Proverbs 18:17 is, to me, one of my absolute favorite. It says that the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. I experienced that personally in my life, listening to teachers like Chuck Missler and Jim McClarty, that I just have very many disagreements with now, but at the time that I was listening to them, they seemed correct in my mind on everything they taught. And Proverbs 18:13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. And this, of course, I see in much of traditional orthodoxy right now, an inability or a lack of desire to even listen to a different point of view and investigate it out. But I learned that I'm not held by a quote unquote orthodox view, because orthodox view, the term orthodoxy, is given by men. What men call orthodoxy, right belief, is not necessarily right belief. God will be the judge of that. We just have to listen to the scriptures. Most importantly, we have to listen to what Jesus teaches, and start in that spot. That's where I've come to in my biblical study, is that the words of Jesus are of utmost importance. And any kind of view that contradicts with Jesus's words and his character is incorrect. We have to go back to the drawing board. So the more I studied, the more I began to learn, the more I saw that it was important to listen to what people had to say and to go back and examine what they were saying. In my studies, I desire to be consistent in everything. Consistent in my approach, consistent in the way I interpret, and I do not want to be ignorant of the facts. I think Christianity is a religion that is built on facts. The resurrection of Jesus, historical fact. And the more facts that I learn, the more that's brought to my attention. I'm willing to change my view if there are things that I'm unaware of. But I don't want to discard facts in my exegesis. And I think it's important that we know why we believe what we believe. Not just that we believe it because this person says we're supposed to, or these people say we're supposed to, but why do we believe what we believe? That's important to me. I don't want to believe something just because. I want to know why I believe it. I want to be able to support what I believe. I think it's important for all of us to do that. And at one point in my life, I could look back and say that I'm just going to believe what the majority believes or what I'm taught because, that person's a pastor or a teacher, or this is my church's view. And so they're right. But, if we sit back and think about it for a minute and we see how many different splits there are in Christianity and in denominations, then that's a really faulty way of thinking. And I think it's a very prideful way of thinking if we feel like we're one of the few who sit within a certain denomination or certain congregation and that ours is the one that's right. But I've been there before, and I've been prideful before, and sometimes it takes being made a fool of by others to become humble, and then being deceived so much in my life, and truth becoming so important to me. I desire to seek the truth, and that's more important to me than being in a certain crowd, to being called orthodox. I'd rather have the truth. And when I began to question much of the tradition that I learned, which was a prayer of mine, that for a long time, God, I want the truth. I don't care about tradition. I just had no idea where that was going to take me down the line. And eventually, it took me to a point where I questioned the very things that I thought were absolutely true that I would never ever question. And that one is the doctrine of the Trinity. And I spent a lot of time studying that. I spent a great deal of time studying the historical facts, looking at the text, historical context, grammar, all the proof text, examined every single text used as a proof text. And I came to the conclusion that the doctrine of the Trinity is a man-made system. But there's a tremendous amount of freedom when you can go to the text and you know that if you just believe what Jesus teaches you, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. God is not going to condemn you for believing what Jesus said. He wants you to believe what Jesus said. So eventually I did become a Unitarian. So my view changed, a drastic view there. And eventually I gave up Calvinism. Upon further, closer examination and examining some of the proof text, I changed my mind there. So I'm a person that's very open to changing my view or my theology, but it has to be based on sound exegesis. It has to be consistent. It has to be grounded in historical context and all those things. And I think if we're all going to be wise about it, we need to at least come to the text as best we can with the idea that we could be wrong about what we believe, and should always be open to hearing what people say. This is the wisdom that Solomon did give us. But when I began to question tradition and orthodoxy, it was at this time that the words of Jesus really started opening up to me. That I could start relating exactly to what Jesus said. For example, Luke 6:22 and 23, Jesus says, "Blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and insult you and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets." And I came to this realization that much persecution of the righteous is done by the religious. In the days of the prophets of Israel, they would speak the truth, and the religious majority would persecute them and hate them. So I began to be able to relate to what Jesus was saying. It really started opening up to me. And then another passage that Jesus, speaking to his disciples, is Mark 7, verse 6, and he's quoting Isaiah. He says, "Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me, but in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." Verse 8 says, "Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men." I begin to see that this is true. There's nothing new under the sun. It was like that before Jesus' day in Israel. It was like that in Jesus' day. It is like that today. It will be like that tomorrow. But I've come to realize that it's most important to listen to what Jesus says. It's also important to listen to everyone's view, to open your ear, to be humble, to admit that you could be wrong, and examine the scriptures. And throughout this process of doing that, I've come to what I think is a consistent way to interpret scripture. I'll just tell you how I do it. I believe in the authority, the final authority of scripture. And I believe scripture interprets scripture. But I also recognize the fact that you have to go outside of scripture sometimes to understand what the scripture is saying, because you're talking about a culture that is vastly different from our own, and writing within the historical context. It's necessary to understand some of the historical events that were going on during that time period, some of the thought processes of the people who were writing during that time period, and of the readers, those that would be reading, for example, the epistles that Paul is writing. Sometimes we have to go outside of Scripture to try to properly interpret the words that are being said there. And the historical context is extremely important. And I think one of the things that I've actually learned, and this is one way I test doctrines and teachings, is to understand the big picture story. The Scripture is telling a story. And you can look in the book of Acts, and you can see when the gospel is presented, that's what the apostles are doing. They're telling the story. Jesus being fulfillment of what God has promised and He's brought. But there's a biblical story here. It starts in Genesis. That God made man in His image, and He made man to give him dominion over the entire earth. And He made man for immortality. He made man to reflect his image and his glory. And he told Adam and Eve to multiply and fill the earth because he wants the earth to be full of his glory. And so the scripture has so many themes that run throughout it, like veins with blood flowing through it. The themes run throughout it, and a lot of times these themes are given in pictures and images, because a picture can display 1,000 words. So it says, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and you can tear out a page of the Bible, or you may not have to have the words exactly right, but if you get the picture in your head, it can teach a truth to you. And so when I test certain teachings, or when I'm examining, I always try to ask myself, does this fit within the entire biblical picture, the story that's being told, the purposes of God for man, fallen man, and God's redemption and restoration of all things to his purposes. And I'm pretty confident that any teaching can be tested against that, and I think it's a surefire way to see if there's something amiss in that doctrine. And that's where I've gotten to now in the way I study. I'm always open to listening to a different view, but I think we can't be too quick to change our minds. I've changed my mind quickly before and found out that I've been wrong on things. So it's important to, I think, also not to think that we in ourselves are capable of understanding. I think we need each other. I think we should listen to each other, and we can all learn from each other because we're made for community. And so I don't try to, and do things on my own. I'll say I rely on a lot of different people, and I have a lot of respect for people, and I have respect for people I disagree with, because even, if I come to a different conclusion, I think we need each other, and we need to be open, and we need to hear each other, and we need to sharpen each other. But I want more than anything for people to experience the freedom to just believe what Jesus says and not being held down because certain men want to condemn other people for not believing what they do. If I could in any way help someone else experience that kind of freedom and joy in searching and studying and in relationship, that would be a tremendous blessing to me. So Lord willing, I'm going to make some videos and interact more with videos on here in the YouTube community. And I just wanted to give my testimony of that. I can look back from where I've come, and I've come a long way, but I know that there's so much that I don't know. So I look forward to fellowship and interaction with everyone on YouTube, and say God bless you all.